Let's do some math real quick. The federal minimum wage in America right now is $7.25 an hour. That's it. If you work 40 hours a week, every single week of the year, you walk away with $15,080 before taxes, about $1,250 a month. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in the United States today is $1,494 a month. That's the average. In cities like New York, Los Angeles, or Miami, we're talking well over $2,000. So before you pay for food, transportation, healthcare, or anything else, just rent alone costs more than your entire monthly paycheck, every single month. And yet, millions of Americans are living this reality right now. Not by choice, not because they're not working hard enough. They're working full-time jobs, clocking in every day, doing everything society tells you to do, and still coming up short. So how does this actually work? How are people surviving, and why hasn't anything changed? That's exactly what we're going to break down today, because the numbers tell a story that most people have never actually sat down to look at, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. But before we get into how people are surviving, let's talk about how this wage got frozen in the first place. Here's something that might surprise you. The last time the federal minimum wage went up was July 24, 2009. That means as of 2026, the minimum wage has been completely frozen for 17 straight years. That's the longest stretch in American history without a single federal increase since the law was first created back in 1938. To put that into perspective, in 2009, an iPhone was still new, social media was barely a thing, gas was under $2 a gallon in most places, and the minimum wage has sat at the exact same number through all of it. What makes this even more striking is what inflation has done to that number over time. The purchasing power of $7.25 has dropped by nearly 30% compared to just 15 years ago. And compared to the peak purchasing power of the minimum wage, which was back in 1968, today's minimum wage worker is getting paid less than workers were getting paid more than 50 years ago. And it gets more specific than that. The Economic Policy Institute calculated that if the minimum wage had kept pace with both inflation and productivity growth the way it was originally designed to, it would be somewhere around $23 to $24 an hour. Oh, and there's a separate category worth mentioning. Tipped workers, like restaurant servers, have a federal minimum of just $2.13 an hour. That number hasn't changed since 1991, over 30 years. So why are some workers getting paid more? Because the federal floor isn't the only number that matters. Here's a wild reality of the American minimum wage system. Right now, two workers doing the exact same job in the exact same industry can be legally paid nearly $10 an hour apart, just because of where they live. Washington, D.C. has the highest minimum wage in the country at $17.95. Washington State is at $17.13. Meanwhile, 20 states, including Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and several others, are still sitting at the federal floor of $7.25. The gap between the highest and lowest legally allowed minimum wage in America is $9.70 per hour. That's close to $20,000 a year for a full-time worker. 2026 did bring some movement. 22 states are implementing wage increases this year, affecting over 8.3 million workers and putting an estimated $5 billion back into workers' pockets. Some notable ones: California is at $16.90, Connecticut at $16.94, New York heading to $17 in certain areas, and Hawaii hitting $16. Florida is set to reach $15 by September. But here's the catch. Getting to $15 or $16 still doesn't solve the problem in a place like San Francisco, where a modest one-bedroom can run $2,500 a month or more. The states raising their wages are often the same states with the highest costs of living. The math still doesn't add up. So who are the people actually living on these wages? The answer might not be what you think. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition publishes a report every year called Out of Reach, and the numbers in it are genuinely hard to look at. According to their 2025 report, to afford a modest two-bedroom rental at average fair market rates in the United States, a full-time worker needs to earn $33.63 per hour. That's 4.5 times the federal minimum wage. At $7.25 an hour, a worker can technically afford, according to the standard guideline of spending no more than 30% of income on housing, $377 per month in rent. The national fair market rent for a one-bedroom is $1,465. For a two-bedroom, $1,749. In other words, the gap between what a minimum wage worker can afford and what the cheapest average apartment actually costs is over $1,000 a month every month, with nowhere to make that up. Zillow's latest rental data from December 2025 puts the average rent across all property types at $2,000 a month nationally. A studio apartment averages $1,480, a one-bedroom $1,500. The cheapest option on the market nationally still costs more than the entire monthly gross income of someone earning the federal minimum wage. This is why the term housing crisis gets thrown around so much. It's not just expensive cities anymore, it's everywhere. But who exactly is living this reality? The faces of minimum wage work might surprise you. There's a common assumption that minimum wage workers are mostly teenagers picking up part-time shifts after school. The data tells a much more complicated story. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics' most recent report from 2024, workers under 25 represent about 43% of those earning at or below the federal minimum. That means the majority, 57%, are adults, 25 and older. Nearly 3 out of every 4 minimum wage workers are employed in service occupations, mostly food preparation, fast food, and restaurant work. The leisure and hospitality industry accounts for around 2/3 of all minimum wage workers. These aren't occasional side jobs. For millions of people, this is the primary income. And consider what that means for a single parent. A full-time worker earning $7.25 brings home about $15,080 before taxes. The federal poverty line for a family of 2, one adult, one child, is over $20,000 a year. That means a parent working full-time at minimum wage is, by the federal government's own definition, living in poverty. Even in states that have raised the minimum wage, a single parent working one full-time job often still qualifies for government assistance programs, Medicaid, food stamps, housing vouchers. This isn't a rare edge case. It's the norm for millions of working families across the country. And when rent is already impossible, food and health care become an entirely different kind of problem. A report from the Urban Institute measuring food insecurity in December 2025 found that nearly 1 in 4 American adults, 24.2%, reported having difficulty affording enough food. That's a staggering number on its own, but dig into the details and it gets heavier. Among working-age adults living with children, 32% reported food insecurity, nearly 1 in 3 parents who work, and more than half of working-age adults living below 200% of the federal poverty line, which is where most minimum wage earners fall, reported struggling to afford adequate food. A 2025 study published in the journal JAMA Network Open found a clear connection between minimum wage levels and food insecurity. At the federal minimum wage, estimated food insecurity among households with children was nearly 10%. In states with higher minimum wages, that number dropped to around 7%. Still too high, but the data shows the connection is real. Then there's healthcare. The uninsured rate among part-time workers, and a significant portion of minimum wage workers are part-time, is 13.4%, compared to 8.8% for full-time workers. In food service specifically, the industry where most minimum wage workers are employed, uninsured rates run among the highest of any sector. What does this mean in real life? It means you skip the doctor, you delay prescriptions, you hope nothing goes seriously wrong, because one unexpected medical bill can be the difference between keeping your apartment and losing it. And when wages aren't enough, many workers turn to government programs, but those programs are under pressure too. Here's something most people don't realize. Millions of Americans who work full-time jobs, 40 hours a week, every week, still qualify for government poverty assistance programs. We're talking SNAP, which is food stamps, Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Program, housing vouchers. These programs were designed as a safety net for people who can't work, but today they're serving people who are working constantly and still can't make ends meet. That's a significant shift from how the system was originally envisioned. And that safety net is getting tighter. Legislation passed in 2025 included cuts to both SNAP and Medicaid, the exact programs that minimum wage workers depend on most. The Urban Institute warned that these cuts could deepen hardship at a time when food insecurity is already running at near-record levels. MIT's Living Wage Calculator, updated in February 2026, shows that even in the cheapest state in the country, South Dakota, the minimum wage needed just for a single adult to cover basic necessities is $13.87 an hour, nearly double the federal minimum. No extras, no savings, no dining out, just the bare basics. In Washington, D.C., that same single adult needs $20.80 an hour to get by. A family of 4 with 2 working parents in D.C. requires a combined income of over $112,000 just to maintain what MIT considers a modest, adequate standard of living. So where does all of this leave us, and what does it actually mean for the people living it every day? Here's the bottom line. A full-time worker earning the federal minimum wage in 2026 earns $15,080 a year. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment costs more than that annually. The federal poverty line for even a 2-person household is above that number. MIT says even the cheapest state in America requires nearly double that wage just to survive. 17 years have passed without a single federal increase. The purchasing power of that $7.25 has eroded every single year through inflation, and the gap between the federal minimum wage and what it actually costs to live anywhere in America has never been wider in modern history. The workers living this reality aren't abstract statistics. They're the people making your food, stocking the shelves, cleaning the buildings, and showing up every single day to jobs that the economy couldn't function without. They're working adults, parents, people who are doing everything right by any reasonable standard and finding that the numbers just don't add up. The debate about what to do about it is loud, complicated, and ongoing, but the math itself isn't really up for debate. When a full-time job pays less than it costs to rent a modest apartment, and that's true in every single state in the country right now, something has fundamentally broken down between the promise of work and the reality of survival. The question worth sitting with isn't really about policy or politics. It's simpler than that. What does it mean for a society when working hard, full-time every week, is no longer enough to live on?